Welcome back to the Kentucky Family and School Partnership 101 module. This begins part 2. So if you're completing this in sections or in two pieces, you'll have already completed the sections an hour and a half under part 1, and this starts the second half of the training. As a reminder, Kentucky is one of 12 states to receive the U.S. Department of Education's statewide Family Engagement Center grant. Within this grant, we have created the Kentucky Collaborative for Families in Schools. It's a group of families and educators and community partners, and we're working to increase the open communication, learning opportunities, and the shared decision-making power across our schools. We believe that in order for our schools to be excellent and equitable and inclusive, it's all of our responsibility to understand how to do that and to understand how to work more effectively as a team. In part 1, you gained a deeper understanding about the importance of these partnerships. You examined some of your core beliefs, read some stories, and saw some videos about the different family engagement school partnerships and what they can look like. Then you learned about some concrete strategies. We introduced you to the 11 goalpost strategies. We also showed you some unique ways to get started and showed you just different opportunities that you could take on your own to begin applying some of this new knowledge. In part 2, we're going to pick up with that self-assessment. So that was your homework after the last section, and at the end of part 1 was to complete your Kentucky Family and School Partnership self-assessment. The sky. As a best practice, we recommend that you not only do it yourself, but that you comprise a team of at least one educator, a family member, and a building leader. And if you serve in one of those roles, great. And then getting the voice of the other 2 roles. Would be even better if you could get a couple voices that represented those different roles, because these activities will really look at the self-assessment and the different scores that you may have received from different members of your school. We're going to learn and apply the conditions of the dual capacity framework. We're going to look at what does a family engagement action team look like and how do you start creating action plans and confirming your steps for improving family engagement at your school. Recommended reading that we brought up in part 1, but want to reintroduce here in part 2, Beyond the Bake Sale and Powerful Partnership. Excellent books packed full of strategies and opportunities to do right now within your school, as well as many case studies and links, surveys, tons of tools that you can take directly from the book and start using in your schools. Dualcapacity.org goes into detail about that dual capacity framework that we will cover, but you could also go to that website and print off the image, and it serves as a great discussion piece in and of itself. Also, the Kentucky Family and School Partnership Guide is packed full of great resources. The tools that you're going to leave with today: reflections and analysis of that self-assessment, how and what that dual capacity framework says. You'll have a concrete family touch point that you can improve with thinking through the conditions for effectiveness, instructions on how to build and organize a family engagement team, and one personal action step. Remember to have your learning packet handy. We're about halfway through this guide in this part 2 section. You can do it online if that suits you. I like to have things printed out, so I've got it printed out right here in front of me. So how do you take data to understanding it into action? Pull out your self-assessment now. And go to your learning guide where you see this table. What I want you to do is record whatever information you have. If you were just able to do it yourself and didn't have anyone else score it, that's okay. Go ahead and put your overall score at the top under whichever role you identify with most: a family, an educator, or an administrator, and then your individual scores across the 5 objectives. If you had another person complete the survey, you would add them into the chart. If you had multiple people in one or more categories, you're going to average the score. So if I had 3 families complete the self-assessment, I'm going to add their overall scores together, divide by 3, and put that number in the first column, and do the same thing for all 5 objectives. We're trying to get a comparison of how different members of your school see the family engagement practices happening? Does everyone largely agree or disagree on where the school is with their family engagement work? So pause this video now and score your self-assessment. Now that you have those scores, you might be incredibly encouraged or incredibly discouraged about what you found. The important thing to know is this isn't a final. This isn't the end of the year test and that's the grade you got. It's where you're going to start. This is a baseline reading just to give you some concrete information of where you're strong, where your weaknesses are in the school, your biggest challenge areas, thinking about target areas for development. It's a great tool to begin collaboration across families, teachers, and school administrators. It gives everybody one tool and a set of common language to rally around. It helps you be more intentional and targeted in your actions instead of just saying, we're going to make family engagement better. It's going to be great this year. Instead, you can think about one objective for the year and say, you know what, this year we're going to really focus on increasing this relationship building objective. And we're going to set some goals and measure our progress towards that goal this year. So first, dig into your findings a little bit. What strengths can you identify? What jumped out as just, knocking it out of the ballpark? Which of these objectives did you score high yourself, or hopefully there was consensus across multiple users about strengths in a certain area? Where did you feel like there's the greatest room for development, the most agreement, disagreement? There may be other ways that you want to reflect on this data, but this is what we recommend as a starting place for digging into what this data is telling you. So take a good 5 to 7 minutes to look through the different scores and answer these reflective questions in your learning packet. Pause this video now. Now we want you to record a few reflections for each objective. Your first objectives was about relationships, and there's critical attributes listed under relationships: welcoming environment, culturally responsive and respectful, engaging families as co-creators, relational, building that trust, and asset-based. Those are the critical attributes for strong relationship building in your school. All 5 of the objectives, turned here into sentences rather than objective titles, are listed in your learning packet. You just took a moment to look at the scores, then you analyze maybe why are certain sections higher or lower, or what am I just seeing at first glance as the commonalities in these scores. Now I want you to dig into each objective and consider the critical attributes listed in your self-assessment and maybe what you learned about your school through this process. Just a few words, notes, or a couple sentences under each of those 5 in your learning packet. We're going to give that self-assessment a little break so you can put it to the side. We're all done digging into it for the moment. We'll bring it back when we do action planning. Now I want you to flip your brain to something a little bit different. I want you to list all of your current family engagement practices or touch points. That may be a very long list, but it's important for us to just take a minute to inventory all of the things that we're doing as a school in order to reach families. Don't just think about the family engagement specific activities like family teacher conferences or orientation day or graduation ceremonies, but all of the touch points we have with families. So I love this picture because drop off and pick up are actually major touch points for our students and our families. Now, we may not be able to have full-blown conversations during these touch points, but we need to remember that this is a touch point for our families. So when we're thinking about things like that welcoming environment and the attitude of staff towards families, drop off and pick up can help set that tone. Or it can help, set a tone that you don't want to set and making families not feel welcome and invited at the school. So right now, don't think about whether your touch points or activities are good or bad. Just laundry list all of the ways you're already engaging with families or those touch points throughout the year. So that is in your packet. Take a moment to just list everything that you're doing at your school already. Pause this video now. In this next section, we're going to talk about the dual capacity building framework. This framework was created by Dr. Karen Mapp in connection with the U.S. Department of Education. And the Pritchard Committee has adopted this framework as the basis for our work for family engagement. I'm going to turn it over to the expert on this model for this section. This is a 5-minute video by Dr. Karen Mapp, and she's going to explain to you the dual capacity building framework in detail.
The first version of the Dual Capacity Building Framework for Family School Partnership was launched at the 2014 Family and Community Engagement Conference held by the Institute for Educational Leadership. This research-based framework was authored in collaboration with the United States Department of Education and published by the Southwest Educational Development Lab. The framework was created to offer a tool for educators, policymakers, families, and community members to understand what's needed to cultivate and sustain partnerships between home and school that support student achievement and school improvement. Since 2014, I've gathered information from current research and from stakeholders about what was useful and what improvements were needed to the framework. Stakeholders suggested that they wanted the new framework to reflect a sense of growth and improvement, and that educators and families come together by building the capacity of each side to work in deeper partnership. Second, the framework needed to more clearly articulate the challenges that got in the way of partnership between families and educators. For example, the new framework points out that many educators have not been exposed to excellent practice, and that's often because they simply haven't received any training in this area. Many families haven't been exposed to excellent practice either, and many have had negative experiences in school, both when they were children and as adults. The way forward starts with the essential conditions, which includes both the process and organizational conditions. These are the nuts and bolts that are a part of any effective family and community engagement practice. The process conditions describe the key components of effective practice to build partnership, and the organizational conditions describe the systems and structures, in other words, the infrastructure needed to support and sustain partnership. One thing that the field stated loud and clear is that all partnerships have to start with trust. We know from the research of Tony Bragg and Barbara Schneider how important relational trust between families and educators is to the effective functioning of a school and to the building of dependable partnerships among the adults. So this was moved to the top of the list in the process conditions. The organizational conditions set the table for the effective execution of the process conditions. The next section highlights the type of growth we should see when all the essential conditions are met. These 4 C's are based on research from my colleague Monica Higgins. We all hear that term capacity building, but what does it actually mean? We know it's important for both sides to improve their knowledge and skills to engage in partnership. But Monica informs us that that's not the only element of capacity building that's important. Who you know, who you can turn to for information, is also an important part of capacity. We have research that reveals that our beliefs and values shift in positive ways as a result of working with others. Last but not least, the confidence of our families and educators to be able to do this work of partnership grows. And finally, in this last section, we see what happens when educators and families build their capacity to work in partnership with each other. We now have a reciprocal exchange that speaks to the power of both families and educators to support each other's continued growth. Educators connect family engagement to their day-to-day work with students and see families as contributors to their children's education. Families engage in various ways that make a big difference for their children's learning. And at the end of the day, we're able to see that this work truly helps us get to the outcome we're all striving for: more effective partnerships that support student and school improvement.
Let's talk about the 6 essential process conditions of the dual capacity framework. The foundational support that we need to build into the planning of family engagement events, programs, and initiatives to ensure success. There are 6 of them. The first being relational, building relationships with parents. The second is linked to learning. So are the activities and events providing parents with an example of links to learning at home. The third is asset-based or strength-based. Are we talking about solutions? Are we staying positive? Are we thinking about the strengths of the family and the strengths of the child? The fourth is culturally responsive and respectful, those equitable practices. The fifth is collaborative. How are we working together? And the sixth is interactive. And so how are we showing and modeling and really that hands-on learning experience for parents and the family during events and programs that we host. So there are some reflective questions in your learning packet. I just want you to take some time, look at those, and circle the questions that resonate with you most under each of those sections. As a reminder, with every new idea, you need to always consider what barriers may exist for families and students, and what you can do to minimize as many as possible. Families can be great allies for this step in the planning process. So oftentimes we have great ideas, we begin to implement them, and then we notice that people aren't showing up, or people say the time doesn't work for them. So it's really good to have parents give feedback on what would work best for them, or what are some of the issues that may be presented that keep them from attending or engaging. Some examples are transportation. I think especially in rural communities, we've seen how transportation can be a huge barrier. Childcare, if there's not child activities provided on site. Working families have to structure their ability to engage with the school around their work schedule. So having some of the working families on your committees and councils is sometimes not doable because we host those during the workday. So what are some of the workarounds that we can provide? What are some flexibility we can give, or what are some virtual options can we give to our families? Sometimes the parent is not the primary caregiver, so reaching out to the primary caregiver and involving them. Generational differences with grandparents or others who may not be as familiar with technology. I think many of us saw that during COVID, and the learning curve for some people to utilize the virtual platforms to engage. Language barriers are huge. I've spent a good deal of time working with some English language learners and have really been enlightened on some of the barriers that they face that I had not even considered. And so doing what we can to reduce those. Learning differences of students and the adults. So we have students who have learning differences. We also have families who have learning differences. And then our cultural differences and diverse expectations of the roles of families, educators, and the students can play. We're going to look at a table that kind of talks about the essential condition, gives an example touch point, and then kind of an example to see that essential condition in action. So that first one being relational, let's think about welcome letters to families at the beginning of the year. So we want to know a little bit about the family, but we also need to share a little bit about ourselves. And whatever you're comfortable with, maybe include that in a letter home. Maybe that's in a welcoming phone call, but that's a real good way to start to build that relationship, share a little bit about you in hopes that they'll share a little bit about them. Link to learning, thinking about like a class party or another type of event where the parent may be at the school. And during that class party, maybe the student has the ability to show their parents what they've been learning. Example here is math tiles. And then the teacher can demonstrate 2 easy math games that they can maybe play at home using a deck of cards. Being asset-based, focusing on strengths, thinking about our parent-teacher conference as more of a family conference, and thinking about those funds of knowledge questions that we can have before we talk about maybe what some of the issues and challenges may be in the classroom setting for the student. But what is unique and special about your family? What are your goals and dreams for your child? What would you say are your child's greatest strengths? What calms your child down if he or she is upset? And how do you support your child's learning? And how can I help? And as a great high school example, my son, who's a new teacher for a freshman math class, is trying to get to know his students, but he's also recognizing that reaching out to parents and asking parents what they need as far as communication goes, as far as support for their child's learning, has been critical in these first few weeks of school so that he really gets a sense of what he needs to do to meet their unique learning styles and to help them and support them the best way he can. Culturally responsive and respectful practices. So when we think about some of our larger group events, maybe we can host some smaller breakout groups or pods with families that are broken down by shared interests. So what are their passions? What are things that they have in common? And these can be very meaningful to remove some cultural barriers, connect people over their shared interest. Remember to remove any language, transportation, or childcare barriers when possible. So there's a great example given here. Collaborative, thinking about those middle and high school teachers making home calls. So a lot of kids to make home calls to. Maybe each teacher could set a goal to call 10 families before the end of the year and explore collaboration opportunities. So kind of seek feedback from parents around how to engage and strategize with middle and high school teens. How could they be more relevant? Teachers should connect and share experiences with each other after they've made these phone calls to improve on their strategies. And then interactive. So let's take the family math and literacy night. Setting up 6 round tables and having teachers orchestrate 1 10-minute learning activity per table that they use in class or that can be done at home. And then parents and students rotate tables and play the games together while the teacher explains the important learning standards covered in the activity. So that interactive piece where we're modeling and doing it together, but also links to learning. You have information in your packet about these essential process conditions, and we're going to ask you to consider a family engagement touch point and how you can embed the 6 essential conditions. So I'm going to give an example before we have you utilize your learning packet. So here's an example. Back to school night. Thinking about building those relationships. Relationships are built on trust, so we have to have time to cultivate that relationship. It's really difficult at a back to school night to attend to all of the family's needs, students' needs. A lot of parents have students in multiple grade levels. So hosting different grade levels or spreading things out a bit can make an event more personal instead of trying to host the whole school at one time or even a whole district event. Add icebreakers, fun scavenger hunts, things so that families can meet with one another and meet with educators. Link to learning. So each teacher can share one way families can support their child's learning at home within the first month of school. A list of questions to ask at home, learning materials that they may need, or a suggested activity at home. Third would be that asset-based strength based essential condition. So consider your volunteer signups and think of ways that you can engage families that are kind of outside of the box. So we have our typical sign up for volunteer list that we do each year, but maybe if we're wanting to engage with other families, we think about what their strengths may be and we tailor our volunteer form to include some of those things that we know parents would really like to do. Culturally responsive and respectful, making sure that our materials are translated, that signs are translated, and that we have interpretation available when needed. And then we need to make sure we advertise events in different languages too. There are several different ways you can do that digitally that make it easier, Google Translate and other translation options. And then consider hosting back to school events at community centers. So reduces a transportation barrier, but sometimes we can reach people in their community better than we can at the school building. And then collaborative, do with families and not to families. And you'll hear us say that a lot. Ask families what they would like to see at an event and ask educators what they have heard of or seen at other schools that they would like to replicate. So oftentimes we hear about fun things that other schools are doing that have been really impactful and thinking about how we can maybe implement that at our school. And then asking English language learning families to mentor and guide new ELL families. So that could be really helpful to English language learning families who want to step up in a leadership role, but it's super important for new families to have that go-to person. And I've seen that play out, and it's really powerful when that ELL family is connected to somebody who can serve as that liaison between them and the school. And then interactive, move information to materials only with like YouTube videos as needed. So most of the time can be spent in conversation between families and educators. So instead of just handing out information all the time, what can we do to improve the conversations that we're having with parents and educators? So ensure scavenger hunts and interactive games don't isolate parent and student, but rather opens up to all families and educators that are available. So sometimes we plan good events, but then it kind of isolates the family to do their own thing over here and not really engage with school staff or other parents. So consider this touch point and think about that activity. Maybe it's something you currently do or something you want to do. And I want you to go through in your learning packet and record each of the essential process conditions, some examples of ways that you can meet that in this activity.
Very excited about this upcoming school year and the opportunities we're going to have to expand our work with parents. The mission of Dayton Independent Schools is to inspire, engage, and grow our students. And this year we've extended that mission to add on two key words: and families. The why behind this extension of our mission is based on the understanding that to grow our students, we must know our students, and no one knows our students better than our families. So this school year, we're going to shift 3 instructional days to 3 positive parenting partnership days. We're going to have a day at the beginning of the year, middle of the year, and at the end of the year, a reflection on how the school year went, in which we sit down and talk with parents, not talk to parents. We're going to listen, we're going to learn, we're going to make authentic conversations about the strengths of the child and the opportunities for growth for this child. So our goal is to improve communication and trust through conversations and listening. We often see that schools can kind of have this factory model. Kids come in, kids come out. There's not this whole partnership wrapped around the child, and that's what we're after in our positive parenting partnerships. So we spent some time reading the book Powerful Partnerships, and we see in core belief number 4 that the primary responsibility for establishing and cultivating these relationships lies on the school staff and school leadership. So that's why we're creating these days, setting aside that critical time to work with parents, work with them through conversations to learn more. So at Dayton Independent Schools, we are making the building of parent partnerships a top priority in our district. This school year, we're taking that bold step and setting aside time to create a system in which we ensure that we partner with parents to grow their children. We believe firmly that we must leverage the power found in our families and the many strengths that they have to achieve our mission to inspire, engage, and grow.
After asking our teachers to examine their family engagement plans, what they came up with was a first hour point of contact plan. So what that means is our first period teachers reached out to every single student's family personally and allowed parents to feel like they had someone in the school that they could contact for questions and concerns. And they did that throughout the year, so parents consistently had that personal open communication with our teachers.
So last but certainly not least, I wanted you to touch on a project that I know is very near and dear to you. You were able to put some kits together for families.
Yeah, last year, we had heard about another school doing something similar, and we took the project and kind of made it our own at Dixie, where we created a social emotional learning kits. And we had 3 kits that we offered. We did a spy kit, we did a sensory kit, and we did a game night kit. And each of our PTA board members that worked on the project took and developed the kit and found the items and priced the items on their own. And then we gave all families at Dixie the opportunity to register for 1 social emotional learning kit per child. And they could come and pick those up in a drive-through line at school. So it gave us an opportunity to provide something to the families there. And we were partnered with Home Depot and Lowe's and got some building kits donated as an extra bonus. And so we were able to have a component of community engagement, which is always important. And our community partners really feel connected to the schools, and the schools can have a feeling that the school families can feel like the community is supporting them as well. And then because we did the drive-through line in person, we were able to, interface with families in a very quick drive-through way. And again, like behind the masks, you could really see both the parents and the kids were really appreciative of the kits and were able to be at school. We lose those opportunities for families to be at school for non-educational purposes, right? For non-primary educational purposes. But this was a way we can't have a fall festival, but we can provide you this fun kit of activities to do at home, and you can pick it up at your school. So your school is behind you. The other parents at your school support you. You're connected in a way that's different from just traditional academic classroom learning.
Awesome. I love it so much. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot, and I just want you to think if before we depart, if you had one description for a school who's really trying to improve family engagement, or one that's just really starting out with implementing new practices, what would be your recommendation? What is the best way to get started? And then what do families and schools need to have effective partnerships?
I would say that it is never a bad idea to ask. Don't wait for the school to call you and say, "Hey, we think the kids need a social emotional kit." If you hear about something great that somebody's doing, or if you come up with an idea on your own, you personally gave the suggestion of the Hugs and High Fives program that we were able to develop it. It never hurts when you have an idea or a glimmer of something to just let a parent leader that's already in action or the administration know, "Hey, we have this great thing. We want to try it. What do you think about this?" Rather than waiting for them to come to you and say, "Hey, we have a need."
Thank you, Ruth.
All right. Thanks, Andrea.
All right, in this section, we're going to look at next steps to put all of these new resources and tools into action. I'm Brooke Gill, the Director of Family Engagement for the Pritchard Committee, and today I'm with Andrea Jackson. Andrea, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Brooke. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Pritchard Committee. I also serve on SBDM at a school here in Fayette, and I work with our Equity Coalition, amongst a few other things. But thanks for having me.
Yes. So we're going to go through some tips and tools for next steps, and Andrea is just going to share some insight that she has from working in this environment for a while and also on the district level for Fayette County before her position here at Pritchard. So 2 steps that we recommend: start small. If we haven't said that enough, saying it again, start small. Don't try to take on over just doing a whole host of things with the principal and the teachers and all the families all at once. So if you're a family member, a teacher, or a building leader, just start with one idea that got you just really excited that you want to see happen at your school. The other so if you want to start small, you could build a team around that one idea, or you could say, I don't even know which idea to start with. So your first move is to create that family engagement action team. So a couple things that we recommend that you do with the team, and Andrea can probably speak to this. Sometimes you can, as you guys are looking through these 4 steps of what you do with a team, it's really important that you get a couple ground rules together so that you don't get that team together and you're all just kind of staring at each other at that first meeting.
Yeah, we don't need a additional meeting just to meet, right? It's important to have goals and ideas ahead of the meeting so that you have a agenda hashed out and really something, attainable goals to go after.
Yes, and there's a phrase that I love that you use about setting the table.
Sure. We always talk about who belongs at the table. We know families as partners belong at the table, but we don't want to just invite families to the table. We want families helping us set the table.
Awesome. You could bring this team together and your first thing could be looking through the digital playbook together. So in terms of that goal, the intention of the group could be to look through the digital playbook and choose an activity that everybody is excited about. So that's part of that setting that table. So don't go ahead and have, hey, this is what we're going to do and this is the timeline we're going to do it. And then you invite families in to rubber stamp it or to, buy into what you've already created. But a good way of setting the table together would be to look through this digital playbook as a group and pick out something that gets everyone on the team excited.
Brooke, on this slide, will you talk about the 4 C's for program goals?
Yes, so the 4 C's for program goals were touched on a little bit by Laura Beard in a couple sections ago. And the idea of the digital playbook is that hopefully we've done some of the hard work for you in looking through all of the different activities out there for family engagement and picking out the ones that really support those 6 essential conditions. So that's the relationship building, linking it to learning, making sure that it's collaborative, that it's interactive. So you should find that the activities in this family engagement digital playbook, they not only speak to your self-assessment that you've already done with your group, but they already incorporate best practices of the essential conditions, and they're designed to meet those 4C program goals. So they're designed to help build the capacity of families, to start creating connections among families and between teachers and families.
I love it.
Thanks for asking, Andrea. All right, family engagement action team. This probably looks pretty similar to SBDM recommendations in some ways, and a lot of subcommittees schools are already asked to create. Do you think that's true, Andrea? Have you seen this type of suggested list for other school teams?
Yes, absolutely. I think that highlighting diverse family members is important. Diversity is not just exclusive to racial diversity. We want to make sure that we have good representation from moms, dads, grandparents, just significant people in these students' lives that can be a part of the decision making.
Absolutely. And thinking about different grade levels too. So sometimes you're going to attract lots of members of sometimes the earlier grades. So those kindergarten and those first grade families are like gung ho and ready to go. But you may not have a lot of representation from the fifth grade families. And that becomes even more complicated when you look at middle and high schools. But you have a child in high school and one in elementary school, and engagement looks very different for those two kids, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely it does. But I think that it's equally as significant for the students, for us as family members, to remain engaged. K through 12, and my student is going to need me on into post-secondary.
All right, great. So you can see, in addition to the families, you're looking for a couple classroom teachers. We also had a recommendation. I thought this was a great recommendation from a educator at Moorhead who teaches students that are studying to be teachers. So they're in teacher preparation programs. And she said teachers would love to be part of these family engagement teams so they can be getting some firsthand experience while they're studying in school about what it looks like to talk about real world, real time situations. So a good idea could be to reach out to a local university and ask if a student would like to join the team. All right, let's work smarter, not harder. Andre, you could speak to this one too. You may already have team fatigue. So we hear a lot when anything new comes down the pipeline from the Kentucky Department of Education or from different district goals. Make a new team, make a team, make an equity team, make a trauma-informed team, and you already have your SBDM and your PTA. So a little bit about how family engagement could become the work of an existing team.
Yeah, I think it's important that, you had an earlier slide that mentioned reaching out to families that are least likely to engage. It's really important to pull in families that aren't part of something yet. I giggled with a friend when I was asking about a frisky group, and she said, "Oh, I'm a part of that too." And I said, "How can you do everything?" So I think that we need to recognize who in our school just needs that little pat on the shoulder to say, "Hey, would you like to be a part of this?" And most of the time, I think the answer is yes, because people are just waiting to be asked to join whatever group it is, or if it's not SBDM, it can be any leadership team where family voice is needed.
Yeah. And I think that's where we can get creative. So like your friend is on probably all of these different teams for her school. And sometimes you find that you've got the same handful of teachers and parents that always raise their hand. And it could really just be one committee because they're on all of the committees. And so that's great. We really need those leaders and those teachers who are passionate about serving in these roles. But then we got to get creative about making sure that all the voices are heard. So if they don't want to show up to the meetings and they don't want to be part of the in-person events, there needs to be a process in place for getting their feedback in some way. Like what would they like to see out of family engagement efforts? Just so that someone's helping to advocate for the folks that aren't serving on these teams.
Right, and it helps us identify the barriers that we're not aware of why families aren't engaging at the rate that we would like to see. And, it just puts us at the forefront of the question. What is keeping you from, is it the time of the day? Are we not hosting the meetings at the right time? Are we not addressing the right type of engagement that you would like to see from the school? So I think it opens that door for conversation to address the barriers.
Absolutely. All right. So what does this team do? So at this point, you may be thinking, oh, okay, so I could ask this person and this person to join me. They would be really great at this. Or I think this would be a great task for the already existing PTA. They're always looking at doing deeper or more work. So what does this family engagement action team do, whether it's a new committee or a subcommittee of an existing group? So here's some ideas listed out that you can look at. To think about, and there's ideas that range from just what does the first conversation look like, or like number 3 is developing a 1-year action plan. But to me, Andrea, like the most important piece is that setting the intention, like you said, and making sure that you've got a lot of voices and opinions either at the table or informing the work. And then I just think the work starts to take shape itself organically.
Absolutely. And the beauty of it is families are going to bring their own dish to the table, right? We keep setting this table, and families are going to bring their own unique dish. And I think that's what we're looking for. That's the diversity, and that's what brings engagement together nicely.
Yep. So I would encourage you, if you are thinking about putting together a family engagement action team, don't overthink too much what it's going to look like for the whole year. The most important part is to set the tone that we're gonna design this together, and we want everyone's opinions and ideas to be brought into the decision-making process. But pretty quickly, you want to start turning that conversation into an action item that feels like very doable. So once all of those ideas are floating around and everyone's really being heard, prioritize. Okay, what are 2 or 3 things that we can actually accomplish this year? And you had a great example from an SBDM member with just where to put the PTA table at orientation night.
Yeah, absolutely. The PTA at my youngest son's school put the PTA table at the front door. So every family that entered the building on orientation night had to pass by the PTA. And it's easy engagement, because even if you weren't wanting to sign up to join the PTA that night, you got to say hello. Your kids were introduced to another family in the school. I mean, it just was a win all the way, and they handed out some goodies to the kids regardless, so it was a treat.
So that could be just a simple idea of, this is the first thing we're going to do to increase enrollment on the PTA and just awareness that we exist, and meet some more families. And then another idea that we recently heard about was the Ludlow district, and they have what they called Prowl Week. And it was parents reflecting, I'm going to get welcoming learners, or I can't remember what the acronym stood for, but it was a great idea. It was a little bit bigger, but the family engagement team set aside a whole week before school started to make those connection calls with all of the families, to speak with them and introduce themselves. And they also scheduled map testing before school started so that they could talk about the map scores with the families during that conversation. So PTA table at the front door, all the way to a whole week of activities. Find where your family engagement team wants to start, and then you can always build from there. All right, so the next step is ready, set, go. Thanks, Andrea, for joining. Go. There are so many ways to go from here. You can create that family engagement action team, or at least get one other person together to get started. Pick a strategy you really love from the digital playbook and see if you can implement it in your classroom, through the PTA, or across your school. We also have SMART goals as an idea. Many of us are familiar with SMART goals, maybe too familiar, but SMART goals are a great way to just get it out in one sentence. So on your in your learning packet, I want you to take a minute. You don't have to fill out all of the different options, but there is a space where you could think about starting with the family engagement action team. There's a next space where it talks about my first action item. Maybe that's from the digital playbook, or another action item that you identified in part 1 of the training. You could write that down. My first action item, who can support me, first meeting date. The third option on that page is to write a SMART goal. So a SMART goal is specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and you set a time to it. So the example that we give in the packet here is that I will recruit 2 teachers and 2 parents from the 6th grade team to take this training by October 31st. We will meet before November 15th for 45 minutes to discuss results from our self-assessments and decide where we want to start and who at the leadership level could support our efforts. We will also pick a second meeting date and 2 additional people to include to improve the diversity of the team. That is a great statement to write out, stick it on something that you'll see often, and just a SMART goal that came out of this 3 hours of training. That will really get you moving and building some momentum. So you could take time to write down your SMART goal. The next page in your learning packet is a pretty detailed action plan template. I don't suggest you start there unless you're doing this training as a team. It's really detailed. It's a little overwhelming, but it's a great place to work towards. So we did want to include it in the learning packet just so you could see an idea of what it might look like to create some type of one-year action plan, or just a really robust way to start attacking family engagement and improving it across your school if you wanted a little bit more than a small step. So pause this video and take a minute to get a very concrete first step down in your learning packet now. Okay, so I'm going to end with just a review of all of the great tools that you've picked up across these 3 hours of training. I can't believe we covered this many in 3 hours. I hope that you're full of excitement and not overwhelmed by all of your tools. You've got many video examples of effective family engagement to pull from. All of those are linked in your learning packet. You also have access to the PowerPoints. You've got family engagement defined and research highlights. These are really handy if you're trying to explain what you intuitively know to be true. What is the definition of family engagement? What does it mean? And then what does the research say about its impact on student success? We know what matters, but show me the research that says it actually makes a difference. You have those examples in this PowerPoint and even more examples in your Kentucky Family and School Partnership Guide. You have DeHaab's story, great conversation piece, a wonderful way to start thinking about redefining family engagement, getting outside of the idea that only the families who show up are the families that are involved. That's not true. 5 roles families can play. Building on DeHaab's story, we also looked at the 5 different roles that families can play. There are leadership opportunities, and it's really important, and we don't want to minimize the importance of our families that step up in leadership roles, like in the PTA and in our SVDMs. But we also have to understand that there's other roles families can play that are incredibly important to students' academic achievement, and understand how we can support those roles from the educator standpoint, but also if you're a family member, discovering which role you really fit into and what does that mean for how you want to partner with your child's school. Got your where to start ideas. So looking at those as simple ways to get started and gain momentum. 11 goalpost strategies. Start with the month that you're in. Whatever month this is, pull that goalpost strategy out and start there. 5 objectives for family engagement. That is outlined in your Kentucky self-assessment. So that helps you compartmentalize the different ways that we think about our school's approach to engagement. You've got that quick school self-reflection tool. That was the 4 versions of a school that come if we call, Fortress, Welcoming School, and Partnership School. You created 1 action item, and if you were doing this live, you had some sort of 1 new connection from part 1 of the training. Then you did your self-assessment, so you have an idea of how you scored yourself across those 5 objectives, and hopefully you have the opinion of at least 2 other perspectives to look at with that self-assessment. You analyzed and reflected on that self-assessment, and you can share with your school team what you discovered through that self-assessment. You've got the dual capacity building framework image. That is a great image to think about in terms of the challenges, conditions, how we evaluate, set up programming with the end in mind, with the 4 C's for program development. And then it ends, if you'll remember, with the different roles that teachers and families can play. You took 1 concrete family touch point and you aligned it with 6 conditions for effectiveness. So you have that tool in your toolbox. You've got instructions on how to build and organize a family engagement action team. And finally, you just created a personal action plan or step for your school. Use these tools. What are you going to do with them? Select 1 or 2, share at a grade level meeting. Host a family focus group if you're a parent with other parents. If you're a teacher, ask some families to help you think through all this. Partner with someone in your school or another school on 1 idea that you liked. So grab your work buddy and say, hey, I want to try this new idea. Will you do it in your classroom too? And we can compare notes. Ask to meet with a school building leader, whether you're a parent or an educator and you took this training and you're feeling really energized, but you know it's going to take the school leadership to be on board. Schedule a meeting with them. Share some key insights from your learning packet. Ask them to take this training. You could take certain materials to existing school councils or other organizations, helping create that school team. Thank you with this beautiful picture from Kentucky Youth Advocates. Thank you, our partners, Commonwealth Institute for Parent Leadership, NCFL, Learning Grove, Partners for Education, Kentucky Department of Education. We're all huge in making this happen. Thank you all for your dedication to family and school partnerships. Please reach out if there's any way we can help. You can find a lot more resources on our website. Thank you.